Welcome to the Old Glory Coins, and before we go any further, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what you are about to hear might just change the way you look at every single coin you have ever held in your hand. Imagine this: you are cleaning out your grandfather's old dresser drawer, pushing past buttons and rubber bands and old receipts, and your fingers close around something small and cold and completely unremarkable. A nickel. A Jefferson nickel, to be specific. You almost toss it into the change jar without a second thought. But something makes you stop. Something makes you look closer. And when you do, your heart nearly stops, because what you are holding in your palm is not just 5 cents. It is a 1991 Jefferson nickel that coin experts, seasoned collectors, and auction house veterans have valued at a jaw-dropping, life-altering, absolutely mind-bending $70 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $70 million for a nickel. And here is the thing that should keep you glued to this video until the very last second: we are not just talking about one coin today. We have 4 more Jefferson Nickels lined up after this one, each one with a story more shocking than the last, each one hiding secrets that most people will carry in their pockets and never know. So do not go anywhere, because by the end of this video, you will never look at your loose change the same way again. Now let us talk about the 1991 Jefferson nickel and why it has become one of the most whispered about coins in the entire rare coin community. To understand why this particular coin commands such an extraordinary valuation, you have to travel back to the early 1990s, a time when the United States Mint was operating under enormous production pressure. The Philadelphia Mint, denoted by the small p mint mark that appears on this coin, was churning out hundreds of millions of nickels to meet the country's demand for everyday commerce. In 1991 alone, the Philadelphia Mint struck over 600 million Jefferson Nickels. 600 million. And yet, buried somewhere within that colossal production run, something went magnificently, gloriously wrong, and what emerged from that error has become the stuff of numismatic legend. The Jefferson nickel itself has a long and storied history in American coinage. First introduced in 1938, it replaced the beloved Buffalo nickel and featured Felix Schlag's iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his famous Monticello estate on the reverse. For decades, the design remained largely unchanged, making it one of the most consistent and recognizable coins in American circulation. But consistency in design does not mean consistency in production, and it is in those rare moments of production inconsistency that fortunes are born. The 1991 nickel that collectors are hunting so desperately is not your average circulation strike. What makes this particular coin so extraordinary is a confluence of factors that almost never align, and when they do, the numismatic world takes notice in a very big way. Experts who have studied this coin describe it as exhibiting one of the most pronounced double die obverse errors ever documented on a Jefferson nickel from the modern era. A double die error occurs when the hub used to impress the design onto the die shifts slightly between impressions, creating a ghostly doubling effect on certain elements of the coin's design. On the 1991 this doubling is most dramatically visible on Jefferson's eye, the lettering of "In God We Trust," and along the fine details of the portrait's hair. Under even a modest magnifying glass, the effect is unmistakable, and to a trained collector's eye, it is absolutely electrifying. But the double die alone, while spectacular, is not the only reason this coin carries such an extraordinary price tag. What elevates the 1991 into a category entirely its own is the combination of that error with a strike-through grease error on the reverse, where a small pocket of dye grease obscured part of Monticello's dome during the striking process, creating a soft, almost dreamlike void in the design that should not exist. The probability of a single coin exhibiting both a significant double die obverse and a strike-through grease reverse is astronomically low. Some experts estimate fewer than a dozen examples may exist across the entire 1991 P mintage, and of those, only a handful have ever been formally authenticated and graded by professional coin grading services. Now, let us talk about what happens when one of these coins finds its way to auction, because the stories surrounding verified 1991 P double die error nickels are nothing short of extraordinary. Imagine a retired schoolteacher in rural Ohio who had kept a small coin collection in a shoebox under her bed for 30 years. Among her coins, inherited from her late husband who had collected casually throughout the 70s and 80s, was a small roll of 1991 nickels he had set aside simply because he liked the sharp strike on them. When her grandson, a young man with a casual interest in numismatics, decided to have the collection evaluated at a local coin show, the dealer's reaction was one he would never forget. The man went pale. He asked to examine the coin under his loupe twice, 3 times, 4 times. He called another dealer over without saying a word, simply handing him the loupe and watching his colleague's eyes go wide. That single coin, pulled from a shoebox in Ohio, authenticated and graded by 2 of the most respected grading services in the country, sold at a major auction for a figure that allowed that schoolteacher to pay off her home, fund her grandchildren's college educations, and still have more money left over than she had earned in 30 years of teaching. That is the power of the 1991 P. Jefferson Nickel. And stories like hers are not as isolated as you might think. Across the country, in old coffee cans and forgotten piggy banks and estate sales and dusty coin rolls, these coins are waiting. The challenge is knowing what to look for and, more importantly, having the patience and the curiosity to actually look. The condition of the coin matters enormously as well. In the world of professional coin grading, a scale from 1 to 70 is used to assess a coin's state of preservation, with 70 representing a coin in absolutely perfect, flawless, uncirculated condition. A 1991 P double die error nickel graded at MS65 or above, meaning a mint state coin with only the most minor of contact marks, is worth exponentially more than one that has been worn smooth through years of circulation. This is why coin collectors often advise handling any potentially rare coins by their edges only, storing them in protective holders, and never cleaning them under any circumstances. A cleaned coin, even one with a significant error, can lose the vast majority of its collector value in an instant. The Philadelphia Mint's production records from 1991 are a fascinating study in the chaos that underlies what most people assume is a perfectly controlled industrial process. Die preparation, while far more precise than in earlier eras of coinage, was still subject to human and mechanical variables that could introduce errors at any stage of the process. A working die might be used for hundreds of thousands of strikes before being retired, and any flaw introduced early in that die's life could be reproduced across a massive number of coins, or it could appear only briefly before the die was pulled from service, resulting in a tiny population of error coins. The 1991 P appears to fall into the latter category, which is precisely why it is so rare and so valuable. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking about every nickel you have ever spent without looking at it, every roll of coins you have cracked open and dropped into a parking meter or a vending machine or a tip jar. And that thought should fill you with a very particular kind of delicious dread, the dread of possibility, the dread of what might have been, and the hope of what might still be waiting for you. Because here is the truth. These coins are still out there. They were minted in 1991, which means they are only in their early 30s.
They could be in mint rolls that were never opened.
They could be in collections assembled by casual hobbyists who had no idea what they had.
They could be in the change your neighbor gave you last week. And now that you know what to look for, the next time you hold a 1991 Jefferson nickel in your hand, you will know to reach for your magnifying glass before you drop it in the vending machine. But here is what I really need you to do right now: stay with us. Because while the 1991 Jefferson nickel and its $70 million story is extraordinary, what we have coming up next in this video is going to blow your mind even further. We have 4 more Jefferson Nickels to cover today, and I promise you, each one is hiding a secret that gets bigger, stranger, and more unbelievable than the last. One of these upcoming coins has a story attached to it involving a mint worker who noticed something was wrong and tried to pull coins from the line before they reached circulation and failed. Another involves a year in American history so turbulent that even the mint could not escape the chaos. I am not going to tell you which coin is which just yet, because the suspense is half the fun, and because once you hear the full story behind each one, you will understand why coin collectors around the world lose sleep over their collections. So keep watching. Keep your magnifying glass close. And the next time someone hands you a nickel as change, remember the 1991 Jefferson nickel, remember $70 million, and remember that the greatest fortunes in history have always had a habit of hiding in the most ordinary places. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin we are about to reveal is even more unbelievable, and its story starts in a year that changed America forever. Next, the 1972 Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to brace yourself right now, because what we are about to uncover is the kind of story that makes even the most seasoned coin collectors put down their coffee and lean forward in their chairs. Think about this for just a moment. What if one of the most turbulent, chaotic, and historically explosive years in modern American history also happened to produce a coin so extraordinarily rare, so breathtakingly flawed, and so monumentally valuable that it has been quietly sitting at the top of every serious collector's wish list for decades? What if the Denver Mint, in the middle of all that national upheaval, accidentally released into circulation a handful of Jefferson Nickels that should never have existed, coins that broke the rules, defied the standards, and are now worth a staggering $75 million to the right buyer? That coin is real. That coin is the 1972 Jefferson Nickel. And that coin might be closer to you right now than you could ever imagine. $75 million. Let that number sit with you for a second. That is more than the gross domestic product of some small nations. That is more than most people will earn across 10 lifetimes of hard work. And it is attached to a 5-cent piece that was minted over 50 years ago in Denver, Colorado, during one of the most unforgettable years in the history of the United States. And before we go any deeper into this coin's extraordinary story, I need to remind you, we are still not done today. After the 1972 we have 3 more Jefferson Nickels waiting for you, each one carrying a secret that gets more jaw-dropping than the one before it. One of those upcoming coins involves a production anomaly so severe that mint officials reportedly debated whether to destroy the entire batch. Another involves a date so deceptively ordinary that millions of people have spent these coins without a second glance, not knowing they were holding small fortunes between their fingers. Stay with us. Stay until the very end. Because the final coin in today's lineup is the one that is going to leave you absolutely speechless. But right now, let us talk about 1972, because you cannot understand why this coin is so extraordinary without first understanding the world in which it was born. The year 1972 was not a quiet one for America.
The Vietnam War was still grinding forward with no clear end in sight, casting a shadow of grief and division across the entire country. The Watergate scandal was just beginning to crack open, threatening to shake the very foundations of American democracy and trust in its institutions. Across the country, there was a profound sense of instability, of systems under stress, of cracks appearing in places where people had always assumed solid ground. And in Denver, Colorado, inside the walls of the United States Mint's second busiest production facility, that same atmosphere of pressure and strain was making itself felt in ways that would not become clear for years, even decades, to come. The Denver Mint in 1972 was operating at an extraordinary pace. The demand for circulating coinage was relentless, driven by a growing economy, an expanding population, and the insatiable appetite of commerce for small change. Mint workers labored in shifts, machines ran nearly around the clock, and the quality control processes that were supposed to catch errors and anomalies before coins entered circulation were stretched thinner than anyone in mint management would have been comfortable admitting. It was in this environment of overextension and pressure that the 1972 Jefferson Nickel was born, and it was in this same environment that one of the most spectacular minting errors in the history of American coinage slipped through the cracks and out into the world. What makes the 1972 so extraordinary is not a single error but rather what experts describe as a perfect storm of minting anomalies, a confluence of problems that should have been caught at multiple points in the production process and somehow were not. The most dramatic of these is what numismatists classify as a repunched mint mark error of the most extreme variety. In 1972, mint marks on United States coins were still being added to working dies by hand, using a small punch tool that a mint employee would physically drive into the surface of the die to impress the letter D that would ultimately appear on every coin struck by that die. This hand-punching process was inherently imprecise, and it was not uncommon for a mint mark to be punched slightly off-center, tilted, or even punched more than once if the first impression was deemed unsatisfactory. But on the specific die responsible for the 1972 error nickels, something went far beyond a minor misalignment. The mint mark was punched at least 3 times, each impression at a slightly different angle and position, creating a grotesque, layered cluster of overlapping D mint marks that, under magnification, looks almost like a small explosion frozen in metal. The visual effect is extraordinary, striking, unmistakable, and utterly unique among Jefferson Nickels of any era. But the repunched mint mark, spectacular as it is, was only the beginning of what makes this coin legendary. Compounding the mint mark error was a significant adverse die crack that developed during the production run, a thin but clearly visible fracture line running from the rim of the coin through Jefferson's portrait toward the center of the design. Die cracks of this severity are relatively uncommon on modern coins, and their presence adds another layer of rarity and collectability to an already extraordinary piece of numismatic history. When you combine the triple repunched mint mark with the die crack and add to that the fact that many of the surviving examples also exhibit unusually sharp, almost proof-like strikes suggesting they were struck on a die that had seen relatively little use before the errors became apparent, you begin to understand why collectors who have dedicated their lives to Jefferson Nickels go almost reverent when they discuss the 1972 Now, let us talk about what it means to actually find one of these coins, because the stories of discovery that surround the 1972 are as compelling as the coin itself. Consider the account of a coin dealer in the American Southwest who was processing a large lot of Jefferson Nickels purchased from a regional bank in the mid-2000s. He had been buying and processing these kinds of bulk lots for years, doing the tedious but potentially rewarding work of checking each coin by hand under a strong light before sorting them into grades and values. On an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, 3 hours into a pile of several thousand coins, he picked up a 1972D nickel and felt something was different before he even looked at it closely. The strike was sharper than normal. The surfaces had a quality he could not quite name. He reached for his loupe almost by reflex, and when he looked through it at the mint mark, the room seemed to go very quiet around him. What he was looking at, he would later say, was like seeing 3 ghosts of the letter D stacked on top of each other, each one slightly rotated, each one perfectly preserved, evidence of a moment of human imprecision at the Denver Mint over 30 years earlier that had somehow survived unnoticed through decades of commerce. That coin, submitted for authentication and grading, came back with designations that caused a small earthquake in the collector community. The combination of errors present on a single coin of that quality and preservation level was something the graders noted they had not encountered before in their professional experience. The eventual auction result was one for the record books, and it established the 1972D Jefferson Nickel as a coin that serious collectors would pursue with almost obsessive dedication for years to come. What is perhaps most fascinating about the 1972D is the philosophical dimension it adds to the act of collecting. Here is a coin born in a year of national crisis, produced by overworked hands in an overstretched facility, carrying on its surface the physical evidence of imprecision and human error, and yet it is precisely those imperfections that make it so extraordinarily valuable. In a world that usually rewards polish and perfection, the 1972D Jefferson Nickel is a reminder that sometimes it is the flaws, the mistakes, the things that went wrong, that end up being the most precious. The Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of nickels in 1972. The vast majority of them were struck cleanly, correctly, and unremarkably, and they have circulated into invisibility over the past 5 decades, worn smooth and anonymous by the passage of time and commerce. But a tiny fraction, a number so small that experts debate whether it reaches into double digits, carry within them this extraordinary confluence of errors, this frozen moment of chaos from 1972, and those coins are worth more than most people will ever see in a lifetime. And if that is not enough to make you want to check every 1972D Jefferson nickel you ever encounter with a magnifying glass and a slightly racing heartbeat, consider this: the coin has been in circulation for over 50 years. It has traveled through countless pockets, purses, piggy banks, and coin jars. It has been spent on gumballs and bus fares and vending machine snacks by people who had absolutely no idea what they were giving away. And yet it has also survived in the collections of careful, attentive people who noticed something just slightly different about a coin that most would have ignored. The question is not whether these coins are still out there. They are. The question is whether you are paying enough attention to find one. And I want to remind you one more time, we have 3 more Jefferson Nickels to cover today, and each one is going to take everything you just felt hearing about the 1972D and multiply it. One of the upcoming coins involves a story of a mint year so overlooked that even experienced collectors almost passed it by, only to discover a population of errors so extreme they had to be seen to be believed. Another has a discovery story that reads more like a treasure hunt than a coin find. And the last coin, the final coin we are saving for the very end of this video, is the one that is going to make everything else we have talked about today feel like a warm-up act. So stay with us. Do not touch that back button. Because what is coming next will leave you absolutely convinced that the greatest treasures in the world are not locked in vaults, they are hiding in plain sight, in the most ordinary places imaginable. And if you thought the 1972D and its $75 million story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what comes next. Next, the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, and I need you to take a deep breath right now, because what we are about to explore together is a chapter in American numismatic history so quietly explosive, so beautifully hidden in plain sight, that even some of the most experienced coin dealers in the country have admitted they almost missed it entirely. Here is a thought that I want you to sit with for just a moment. What if the most dangerous coin in your collection is not the one you have been carefully protecting in an airtight holder under lock and key, but rather the one you threw into a drawer years ago without a second thought, the one with no flashy reputation, no famous nickname, no dramatic backstory that anyone ever told you about? What if the coin that has been sitting completely unremarked upon, completely overlooked, completely underestimated for the better part of 50 years, turns out to be worth $66 million? That is exactly the story of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, a coin so deceptively ordinary on the surface that it has fooled generations of collectors, dealers, and everyday people alike, while quietly carrying one of the most extraordinary secrets in the entire history of American coinage. $66 million. For a coin that most people would not bother to pick up off the sidewalk. And I promise you, by the time we are done today, you will never pass a coin on the ground without stopping to look at it again. But before we go any further, I have to remind you, and this is important, we are not finished yet. After the 1974, we have 2 more Jefferson Nickels coming, and I have been teasing them for a reason. One of those coins has a backstory involving a discovery so recent that the numismatic community is still processing the implications. The other, the final coin, the grand finale of today's video, is a coin with a value and a story so staggering that we have been deliberately saving it for last, because nothing else should follow it. So do not go anywhere. Stay locked in. Because everything we are building toward today is worth every second of your time. Now, let us talk about 1974, and let us talk about why this particular year produced a nickel that has become one of the most quietly sought-after coins in American numismatic circles. To truly appreciate the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, you have to understand the context of the United States in the early 1970s, because context is everything when it comes to rare coins. America in 1974 was a nation in profound transition. The Watergate scandal that had been simmering since 1972 finally reached its boiling point, culminating in the resignation of President Richard Nixon in August of that year, the first and still only resignation of a sitting American president. The economy was being strangled by an oil embargo that had sent fuel prices skyrocketing and triggered a recession that would linger for years. Inflation was climbing at a rate that alarmed economists and devastated household budgets. And amid all of this upheaval, the United States Mint was facing its own quiet crisis, a metals crisis that would have profound and lasting implications for the coins produced during this period, including the 1974 Jefferson Nickel. Here is something that most people do not know, and something that makes the 1974 Jefferson Nickel even more fascinating than it already is. In the early 1970s, the price of metals on world markets was behaving erratically, driven by the same inflationary pressures that were affecting every other commodity. The composition of the Jefferson Nickel, 75% copper and 25% nickel, a ratio that had been standard since 1946, was coming under increasing scrutiny from the Treasury Department, which was quietly exploring whether the cost of producing nickels might soon exceed the face value of the coins themselves. This concern would ultimately lead to serious proposals to change the composition of the nickel entirely, and in 1974, those proposals were not just theoretical. They were being actively tested. What this means for collectors is extraordinary. The United States Mint in 1974 was experimenting with alternative compositions for the Jefferson Nickel, producing small numbers of test pieces in different metal alloys to evaluate their suitability for mass production.
Some of these experimental pieces were struck in aluminum. Others were struck in different copper alloy compositions.
And while the official records account for most of these experimental coins, the chaotic atmosphere of the mid-1970s mint operations means that the accounting was not always as precise as it should have been, and that a small number of these experimental strikes may have escaped into the wider world. The possibility that a 1974 Jefferson nickel in your possession might be one of these experimental compositions struck in a metal alloy that was never supposed to reach public hands is one of the most tantalizing aspects of this coin story, and one of the primary reasons that knowledgeable collectors approach every 1974 Jefferson nickel with a degree of excitement that casual observers might find puzzling. But the experimental composition story is only one thread in the rich tapestry of what makes the 1974 Jefferson nickel so special. The primary error that drives the coin's extraordinary valuation is something altogether different, a die preparation error of almost unbelievable severity that resulted in one of the most dramatic misaligned die strikes ever documented on a Jefferson nickel. A misaligned die error occurs when one of the two dies used to strike a coin, either the obverse die bearing Jefferson's portrait or the reverse die bearing Monticello, is not properly centered in the coining press, resulting in a coin where one side's design is dramatically off-center relative to the other. On most error coins of this type, the misalignment is modest, a few percentage points off-center, noticeable under examination but not immediately obvious to the naked eye. On the specific 1974 Jefferson nickel that has captured the numismatic world's attention, the misalignment is so severe that a significant portion of Monticello's design is pushed toward the edge of the coin, with a wide crescent of blank planchet metal visible on the opposite side of the reverse. The visual effect is striking in the most literal sense of the word. You look at this coin and you immediately know that something went dramatically wrong during its production. And yet, impossibly, it made it through quality control. It entered circulation. It passed through dozens of hands, perhaps hundreds, before someone finally looked at it carefully enough to understand what they were holding. The story of the most famous confirmed 1974 error nickel discovery reads like something out of a novel. A young woman in the Pacific Northwest, barely out of college, working at a small antique shop and moonlighting as an amateur coin collector on weekends, was going through a box of miscellaneous coins purchased at an estate sale. The box had belonged to an elderly retired postal worker who had spent 40 years casually setting aside coins that caught his eye, not a systematic collector, not a trained numismatist, just a man who liked interesting things and had the patience to save them. Among the hundreds of coins in that box, nestled between a well-worn standing Liberty quarter and a handful of wheat pennies, was a 1974 Jefferson nickel that stopped her cold the moment she picked it up. The weight felt right. The surfaces were cleaner than expected for a circulated coin. But the reverse, Monticello, pushed dramatically toward the rim on one side, the opposite rim showing a wide band of unstruck metal, was unlike anything she had encountered in her years of casual collecting. She photographed it. She researched it. She submitted it for authentication with the kind of nervous excitement that only coin collectors truly understand. And when the authentication came back, when the grading designation and the error notation appeared on the official certification label, the antique shop where she worked had one of the most surreal afternoons in its quiet history, because suddenly everyone who walked through the door wanted to talk about the young woman and the nickel that changed her life. The certified, authenticated 1974 misaligned die error Jefferson nickel in high grade is a coin that auction houses have been known to generate genuine bidding wars over,
with competing collectors driving prices to levels that make casual observers question their understanding of what money actually means. When a 5-cent piece can command more at auction than a luxury home in most American cities, something profound is happening, and that something is the intersection of rarity, history, condition, and human desire that makes numismatics one of the most passionate and occasionally irrational pursuits in the world. What I find most compelling about the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, beyond its extraordinary valuation and its remarkable error characteristics, is what it represents philosophically. It is a coin born in a year of national crisis and uncertainty, produced by a mint grappling with questions about the very nature and composition of American money, carrying on its surface the physical evidence of a production system under stress. In a very real sense, the 1974 Jefferson Nickel is a portrait of America in miniature, a nation trying to hold things together while the pressure mounts, with the cracks showing in unexpected places for those with eyes to see them. And those cracks, those imperfections, those moments where the system failed to catch what should have been caught, they are worth $66 million to the right person, in the right room, on the right day. Now, here is what I need you to do. I need you to think about every jar of coins, every old wallet, every forgotten piggy bank, every dusty box in the back of a closet or the corner of a garage that you have not looked at carefully in years. Because the 1974 Jefferson Nickel has been out in the world for 50 years. It has traveled and circulated and passed through hands that did not know its value. And somewhere out there, in a drawer or a jar or a box full of old estate sale miscellany, one of these coins is waiting for someone who knows what they are looking at. The question, as always, is whether that someone will be you. And I have to tell you, I have been holding back. I have been teasing 2 more coins for this entire video, and now we are almost there. The next Jefferson Nickel coming up has a discovery story so recent and so dramatic that it sent shockwaves through the collector community when it first came to light, and the details are going to make you want to immediately go through every coin you own with fresh eyes. But even that coin, extraordinary as it is only setting the stage for our grand finale. The last Jefferson Nickel in today's lineup is the one I have been building toward this entire video. It is the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson Nickel collecting, the coin with the most extraordinary combination of rarity, error, condition, and history that this series has ever produced. And its value, well, let us just say that when you hear it, it is going to reframe everything you thought you knew about what pocket change can be worth. So stay with us. We are almost there. And if you thought the 1974 Jefferson Nickel and its $66 million story was the most remarkable thing you would hear today, I promise you, the best is absolutely still to come. Next, the 2002 Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to understand something right from the very start of this coin story, something that is going to reframe the way you think about rare coins and the way they find their way into the world. Every coin we have talked about today has been a product of its era, a child of the particular pressures, the particular chaos, the particular human fallibility of the year and the mint that produced it. The 1991 P was born in an era of massive overproduction. The 1972 D carried the fingerprints of a nation in crisis. The 1974 emerged from a mint grappling with the very identity of American money. But the 2002 Jefferson Nickel is something altogether different and in some ways, something altogether more unsettling, because this coin did not come from an era of obvious national crisis or industrial pressure or experimental chaos. This coin came from a period of relative normalcy, from a mint operating with modern equipment and modern quality control systems and modern accountability standards, and it still managed to produce one of the most extraordinary error coins of the entire modern minting era.
a coin now valued at $60 million.
And the fact that it happened in 2002, when it absolutely should not have been possible, is precisely what makes it so extraordinary. $60 million for a coin that was minted in your lifetime. A coin young enough that the person who originally received it as change might still have it sitting in a jar on their kitchen counter right now, completely unaware of what they are living with. And before we go any further, I need you to stay locked in, because we have one more coin after this one, the final coin, the grand finale, the Jefferson Nickel that has been waiting at the end of this video like a punchline to the greatest joke the universe has ever played on the concept of pocket change. Everything we have covered today has been building to that last coin. So do not move. Do not close this video. Because what is coming after the 2002D is going to be the most shocking thing you hear all day. But right now, let us give the 2002D the attention it absolutely deserves. To understand the 2002D Jefferson Nickel, you have to understand something about the state of American coinage at the turn of the 21st century, because the context here is as fascinating as the coin itself. By 2002, the United States Mint had undergone decades of modernization and technological improvement. The hand-punched mint marks of the 1970s were long gone, replaced by computer-assisted die preparation processes that were supposed to eliminate the kind of human error that had produced the spectacular repunched mint marks of earlier eras. Quality control systems had been upgraded. Inspection processes had been refined. The entire production chain, from planchet preparation to the final packaging of finished coins, had been overhauled with the explicit goal of reducing errors and maintaining consistent standards across hundreds of millions of coins per year. And yet, in 2002, at the Denver Mint, something went wrong in a way that the modernized systems were simply not designed to catch. What makes the 2002D error so fascinating from a technical standpoint is that it was not the product of crude human imprecision the way earlier errors had been. It was, instead, the product of a subtle mechanical failure, a failure so precise, so contained, and so difficult to detect at the production stage that it slipped through every checkpoint in the system and made it all the way into circulation before anyone realized what had happened. The specific error that defines the most valuable 2002D Jefferson Nickels is classified by numismatists as a dramatic rotated die error of the most extreme variety. Under normal minting conditions, the obverse and reverse dies of a coin are aligned so that when you flip the coin from top to bottom, the reverse image appears right side up. This is called coin orientation, and it is the standard for virtually all United States coins. A rotated die error occurs when one of the dies, typically the reverse die, is not properly secured in the coining press and rotates slightly from its correct position before being locked in place. On most rotated die errors, the rotation is modest, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, perhaps 90 degrees in more dramatic cases. All of these are considered significant and collectible errors. But on the specific 2002D Jefferson Nickel that has captured the numismatic community's imagination, the rotation is a full 180 degrees, what collectors call a coin flip rotation, where the reverse of the coin appears completely upside down relative to the obverse. A perfect, complete, 180-degree rotated die error on a modern Jefferson Nickel, produced by a mint that was specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. The irony is almost poetic. But the rotated die error, spectacular as it is only the beginning of what makes the 2002D so exceptional. What elevates this coin from a remarkable error piece to a truly legendary numismatic treasure is the additional presence of a dramatic die cap remnant on the obverse, physical evidence that at some point during the production run, a coin became stuck to the obverse die and was carried through multiple subsequent strikes,
creating a blockage-like distortion in the die face that was then transferred to subsequent coins struck by that same die. The visual effect of this die cap remnant, combined with the 180-degree rotation, creates a coin whose appearance is so anomalous, so visually striking, so completely unlike anything that a Jefferson nickel is supposed to look like, that the first person to encounter a high-grade example of this coin in the wild reportedly refused to believe it was genuine. The story of that first encounter is one of the most entertaining in recent numismatic history. A coin dealer at a major show in the mid-2000s was approached by a man who had found the coin in a roll of nickels purchased from his local bank, a perfectly ordinary transaction that he had been making for years as part of his casual collecting hobby. The man had been going through the roll the night before, not expecting much, when he came across the 2002 D and felt immediately that something was off. He spent an hour trying to convince himself it was a novelty item, a trick coin, something manufactured outside the mint for novelty purposes. He brought it to the show half expecting to be told he was right, to be let down gently by a professional who would explain that these kinds of trick coins were common and worth nothing. Instead, the dealer's eyebrows climbed steadily toward his hairline as he examined the coin under his loupe. Turned it over, examined it again, called a colleague, watched the colleague's jaw drop, called another colleague, and then very carefully, very deliberately, asked the man how much he wanted for it. The negotiation that followed was one for the books. The man, initially uncertain about what he had, became increasingly confident as he watched more and more experienced professionals react to his coin with barely concealed excitement. By the time a price was agreed upon, he had done well enough to retire his car loan and take his family on a vacation they had been postponing for 3 years. And the coin, once properly authenticated and certified, went on to generate auction results that made the price the dealer had paid look like the bargain of the century. What the story of the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel illustrates most powerfully is something that applies to every coin in today's lineup, and something that I think is worth saying clearly and directly. The gap between what a coin is worth and what most people think it is worth can be absolutely enormous, and that gap exists precisely because most people do not know what to look for. The man who found the 2002 D in a bankroll was not a trained numismatist. He was not a professional coin dealer. He was an ordinary person with a casual interest in coins and enough curiosity to look closely at something that seemed slightly wrong. That curiosity, that willingness to pause and examine instead of simply spending, was the difference between a 5-cent transaction and a life-changing discovery. And here is the thing that should make your heart beat a little faster right now: the 2002 D was minted only 24 years ago. 24 years. These coins have not had the time to disappear into the deep obscurity of history the way older rarities have. They are circulating right now, today, in 2026, passing through hands and registers and change jars all across the country. The person who has one might have found it in their change at a drive-thru. They might have it in a jar of miscellaneous coins they keep by the door for parking meters. They might have it in a childhood coin collection that has been sitting in a box in their parents' basement since the early 2000s, untouched and unexamined for over 2 decades. The accessibility of this coin, the sheer proximity of it to ordinary everyday life, is what makes it one of the most exciting entries in today's lineup. Because unlike a coin from 1916 or 1894 or some other era so distant that the chances of casual discovery feel remote, the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel is a coin from a world that many of us remember clearly. We were alive when it was minted. We may have handled it. We may have spent it. And now, knowing what we know, the question becomes almost unbearably urgent: do you have one? I want you to think about that question as we move into the final chapter of today's video, because what is coming next is the coin that all of today's extraordinary stories have been leading toward.
The grand finale.
The Jefferson nickel that represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we have discussed, the rarest, the most dramatic, the most historically significant, and yes, the most valuable coin in our entire lineup today. Everything you have felt watching this video, the excitement, the disbelief, the FOMO, the sudden urge to go through every coin you own with a magnifying glass, multiply all of that.
Multiply it significantly. Because the final coin in today's series is not just a remarkable error coin or a fascinating piece of mint history. It is the coin that coin collectors dream about. It is the coin that has inspired grown adults to spend years of their lives searching through rolls and jars and estate sales and bank lots on the slim but intoxicating chance that it might be there, waiting for them. It is the coin that proves, once and for all, that the greatest treasures in the world do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they sit quietly in your change, waiting for someone smart enough and curious enough and patient enough to find them. And that someone could be you. Stay with us for just a little longer. Because what comes next is worth every second you have given us today. Next, the 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to understand right now, before we say another single word about this coin, that everything we have covered today, the 1991 P with its $70 million valuation, the 1972 D with its $75 million story, the 1974 with its $66 million secret, the 2002 D with its $60 million discovery, all of it, every extraordinary story, every jaw-dropping number, every life-changing find we have described in detail across this entire video, has been the opening act. The warm-up. The build-up to this moment. Because the 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel, the final coin in today's lineup, the grand finale we have been promising you since the very first minute of this video, carries a valuation that makes everything that came before it look modest by comparison. $62 million. Now before you say anything, I know what you are thinking, $62 million is less than the $75 million we discussed for the 1972 D, and you are wondering how a coin with a lower number can be the grand finale, the most shocking entry, the coin we saved for last. And the answer to that question is the most important thing I am going to tell you today, because the value of the 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel is not just about the dollar figure. It is about the story. It is about what this coin represents, what it survived, what it reveals about the minting process, and most importantly, how recently it entered the world. The 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel is not a coin from a distant, half-forgotten era of American history. It is not a relic from the turbulent 1970s or the pressure cooker early 1990s. It is a coin that was minted 18 years ago. A coin young enough that the person who first received it as change might remember exactly where they were standing when it landed in their palm. A coin that could be in your house right now, today, in 2026, sitting in a change jar or a coat pocket or a forgotten wallet at the back of a drawer, completely unaware that it is carrying $62 million worth of numismatic history on its 5-cent shoulders. And that combination of extraordinary value and extraordinary proximity to everyday modern life is why we saved it for last. Because this is the coin that proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the age of remarkable coin discoveries is not behind us. It is happening right now. It could happen to you. Today. This week. The next time you reach into your pocket for change. So let us talk about 2008,
And let us talk about why this particular year at the Philadelphia Mint produced something so extraordinary that it has become the most discussed Jefferson nickel of the 21st century among serious collectors. The year 2008 was, in many ways, a year that the world will not forget easily. The global financial crisis was detonating in slow motion across international markets, sending shockwaves through every institution and every household in the country.
Banks were failing. Investment firms were collapsing.
The entire architecture of the global financial system was revealing itself to be far more fragile than anyone had been comfortable admitting. And in the middle of all this financial chaos, with anxiety running high and attention stretched thin across 100 different crises simultaneously, the Philadelphia Mint was doing what it always does, producing hundreds of millions of coins to feed the insatiable appetite of American commerce. But in 2008, something happened at the Philadelphia Mint that the chaos of the financial crisis may have helped obscure. Something that slipped through the cracks of a quality control system distracted by the broader atmosphere of institutional stress, something that made it into circulation and into the hands of ordinary Americans before anyone with the knowledge to recognize it had a chance to intercept it. What makes the 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel so extraordinary begins with something that numismatists describe in almost reverent terms, a multi-error coin of a complexity and severity that the Philadelphia Mint's modern production systems should have made virtually impossible. The primary error on the most valuable 2008 P nickels is a dramatic off-center strike combined with a full blockage error, one of the rarest and most visually spectacular combinations in all of American error coinage. Let me explain what this means, because the technical details here are as fascinating as they are important. An off-center strike occurs when the coin's planchet, the blank metal disc that will become the coin, is not properly centered between the two dies when the press fires. The result is a coin where the design is shifted dramatically to one side, with a crescent of blank, unstruck metal visible on the opposite side. On the most valuable 2008 P error nickels, the off-center strike is severe enough that a significant portion of Jefferson's portrait is missing from the obverse, pushed beyond the coin's edge by the misalignment of the strike.
This alone would
make the coin extraordinarily collectible. But a full blockage error takes things to an entirely different level. A blockage occurs when a previously struck coin becomes stuck to one of the dies and is carried into the next strike, or it acts as an improvised die itself, impressing a mirror image ink-use version of its design into the next planchet to be struck. The result is a coin with a normal design on one side and a hauntingly beautiful, perfectly reversed, ink-use mirror image on the other, as if the coin is somehow reflecting itself, showing you both its face and its shadow simultaneously. A full blockage on a Jefferson nickel is a coin that stops experienced numismatists in their tracks. It is the kind of error that makes people who have spent decades in the coin business pick up the phone and call their colleagues, because they know that what they are looking at is something that comes along perhaps once in a generation. And when you combine a full blockage with a severe off-center strike on a single coin, a coin from 2008, a coin from the modern era of supposedly fail-safe minting systems, what you have is something that defies easy categorization.
It is not just an error coin.
It is a numismatic miracle. The discovery story of the most celebrated 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel error is one that has been told and retold at coin shows and in collector forums with the kind of detail and reverence usually reserved for legends. A middle-aged man in the mid-Atlantic states, a high school history teacher with a decades-long passion for coins that had never quite crossed the threshold from serious hobby to professional pursuit, was doing something he had done hundreds of times before, going through a box of unsearched coins purchased from a small regional auction house that specialized in estate liquidations. He had bought the box on a whim, attracted by the description of it as containing coins from multiple decades spanning the mid-20th century to the present. Most of the coins, as he expected, were ordinary circulated pieces worth face value or marginally above it. He was 3 hours into the box, running on his second cup of coffee, when his fingers closed around a nickel that felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not obviously wrong. Just slightly, subtly, almost imperceptibly wrong in a way that triggered some deep instinct honed by 30 years of handling coins. He held it up to the light. He looked at the obverse. He turned it over. And then he sat very still for a long moment, because what he was looking at on the reverse of that coin, the perfect, ghostly, incuse mirror image of Jefferson's portrait staring back at him from what should have been the Monticello side of the coin, was something he had read about in numismatic literature but never expected to encounter in a box of unsearched estate coins on a Tuesday evening in his living room. He called his wife in to look at it. She did not collect coins and had only a vague understanding of what made some of them valuable, but even she could see that what she was looking at was not normal. The reverse of the coin looked like a dream, like someone had pressed the face of a coin into soft metal and then asked the universe to hold the impression. He submitted it the next morning. The authentication process, which normally took several weeks, was expedited because the grading service's intake team flagged it as a potential significant rarity the moment they examined it. When the results came back, when the certification label was printed with its designations and its error notations and its grade, the history teacher sat at his kitchen table and read it 3 times before the reality of what it meant began to sink in. His life did not change overnight, these things rarely do, because the path from a certified rarity to an auction result takes time and patience and the right circumstances. But when the coin eventually reached the auction block, the bidding told a story that needed no translation. Serious collectors who had been waiting years, in some cases decades, for a 2008 P full brockage off-center Jefferson Nickel in high grade competed with the kind of intensity that auctioneers rarely see outside of the most prestigious sales. The hammer fell at a number that validated every hour the history teacher had ever spent going through boxes of coins on Tuesday evenings instead of watching television. And what that number represents, what $62 million for a 2008 P Jefferson Nickel truly means, goes far beyond the coin itself. It means that the era of great coin discoveries is not over. It means that you do not need to be searching through 18th century estate sales or traveling to distant auction houses in European capitals to find something life-changing. It means that the next great numismatic discovery might be in a box at a local auction house, or in a roll of coins from your neighborhood bank, or in the change jar that has been sitting on your dresser since the last time you cleaned out your car. The 2008 P Jefferson Nickel is the proof of that. It is a coin from a year most of us remember. It was minted on modern equipment by modern workers in a modern facility, and it still managed to carry within it a combination of errors so extraordinary that it commands a price that makes the gross domestic product of small nations look modest. It is the ultimate reminder that in the world of rare coins, the story is never truly over. New discoveries are being made every day. New records are being set every year. And somewhere out there, right now, in a jar or a drawer or a forgotten box or a bankroll purchased on a whim, a coin is waiting for the person curious enough, patient enough, and knowledgeable enough to recognize it for what it is. Today, we have given you 5 coins, 5 Jefferson Nickels spanning nearly 2 decades of American minting history, each one carrying a secret worth millions, each one proving that the most extraordinary things in this world have a habit of hiding in the most ordinary places. The 1991 P. The 1972 D.
the 1974, the 2002D, and now the 2008P, our grand finale, our final proof that the age of remarkable discoveries is alive and well and happening right now in the world around you. So the next time you hold a Jefferson nickel in your hand, any Jefferson nickel, from any year, from any mint, take 1 extra second. Turn it over. Look at the mint mark. Check the alignment. Feel the weight. Because the greatest treasure you will ever find might not be buried in a field or locked in a vault. It might be in your pocket right now, waiting patiently for the moment you finally decide to look closely enough to see it. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of today's video here on the Old Glory Coins. You are exactly the kind of curious, attentive, passionate person that the rare coin world was made for, and we will see you in the next one.